it's dull. It's, nobody's enjoying. I grew up in a neighborhood with lots of different types of people, a lot of different nationalities, and along the way, because I moved a lot, I was born in the Depression, and so I moved a lot, and I knew a lot of people, and I always enjoyed the differences.
For much of the 20th century, when you thought of the American Western, you thought of Clint Eastwood, the squint, the stubble, the coiled quiet before a storm of violence. He embodied an entire genre's archetype, from his breakout in Sergio Leone's spaghetti westerns to his later directorial triumphs. He became not just a star of westerns, but a kind of living shorthand for them, yet somewhere along the way, he stepped away from the saddle, the dust, and the gunslinging mythos that had made him a household name. The reasons for that shift weren't abrupt or born from a single moment. They were the result of decades of evolution, both in Eastwood as an artist and in the genre itself. And perhaps the clearest explanation for why he stopped lies in what many consider his best movie, Unforgiven. When Eastwood released Unforgiven in 1992, he was already a Hollywood legend. The film wasn't just another Western, it was the Western he'd been building toward his entire career. On the surface, it told the story of William Money, a retired outlaw and killer reluctantly drawn back into violence for one last job. But underneath, it was Eastwood confronting the very genre that had defined him. Unforgiven stripped the romance out of the Old West, replacing noble duels and black and white morality with cold mud, aching bones, and the cost of taking a life. It examined the weight of killing, the lies people tell about their past, and the way time corrodes the myths we cling to. By directing and starring in a film that dismantled the heroic gunslinger image, Eastwood was, in a way, closing the book on it. He had played the stoic Avenger countless times, but Unforgiven asked, what happens when the man behind the legend is just an old widower with failing eyesight who can't even mount his horse without struggle? It was the genre in its most honest form, and once you've made that statement, there's little point in repeating yourself. As Eastwood himself has implied, the challenge was gone. He'd taken the Western as far as he wanted to take it, and there was no reason to return just to tread the same ground. That sense of challenge had always been central to Eastwood's choices. Even in the heyday of his partnership with Sergio Leone, the director who made him a global star, Eastwood was willing to walk away. After The Good, The Bad, and The Ugly, Leone invited him to star in Once Upon a Time in the West, now hailed as Leone's masterpiece. Eastwood declined. He also turned down Duck, You Sucker, another Leone Western. In later interviews, he explained that he felt the director's focus was shifting toward grand spectacle at the expense of storytelling, and that as an actor, he had less and less to sink his teeth into. To him, the work had to be more than just standing in front of a sweeping vista. It needed to challenge him emotionally and dramatically. Once that challenge disappeared, so did his interest.
And I think if people enjoy the differences in everybody, then they are willing to, to have fun with it. We used to have fun with it. We'd insult each other and laugh and scratch with it, and it was not a bad thing. People didn't take themselves that seriously at that point in time.
Still, his break from traditional westerns wasn't absolute. In the years after Unforgiven, he returned to the genre's spirit, if not always its exact trappings. Films like Gran Torino and Cry Macho carry the DNA of a Western. The solitary protagonist, the moral reckoning, the outsider who enforces his own code. Gran Torino, set in modern Detroit, plays like a frontier story dressed in the clothes of the 21st century. Walt Kowalski could easily be a gunslinger from the plains, trading a Colt revolver for a beat-up rifle and a garage full of tools. Eastwood didn't abandon the Western so much as he absorbed it into his broader storytelling. His reluctance to revisit the genre wholesale may also have been shaped by his early experiences. In the 1950s, long before Leone cast him, Eastwood was a struggling contract player at Universal. By his own account, he couldn't land roles in westerns, the hottest genre of the day, because casting directors thought he looked too much like Gary Cooper. The young Eastwood, lean-faced and untested, was nicknamed Coop around the lot. Producers didn't see the point in hiring a Cooper look-alike when the real thing was still making movies. Being turned away from the very genre that would later define him must have left an impression, and when success finally came, he wasn't about to let himself get stuck there forever. By the time he filmed Rawhide in the late 1950s and early 60s, Eastwood had proven he could anchor a Western. Then came A Fistful of Dollars, For a Few Dollars More, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, a trilogy that redefined the genre and catapulted him to stardom. Yet even in those years, he was already thinking about what lay beyond the gun belt. He sought out projects that stretched his range, from crime thrillers to dramas, from war stories to romance. Directing offered another kind of challenge, and he threw himself into it, crafting films that, while sometimes echoing Western themes, explored worlds far beyond the dusty streets of frontier towns. The truth is, Unforgiven wasn't just a movie for Eastwood, it was a statement. It dedicated itself to Leone, the man who had given him his international break, but it also served as a final word on the kind of westerns they had made together. It honored the genre's grandeur while dismantling its illusions, and in doing so, it gave Eastwood the closure he needed. Going back to make another traditional western after that would have felt like painting the same landscape twice. You can love a form, but you also have to know when you've said all you have to say with it. Even when opportunities arose to collaborate again with Leone before the director's death in 1989, fate and timing intervened. There were discussions of a Western miniseries called Colt, in which Eastwood would have played a gunslinger who commissions a custom revolver, only to be killed soon after acquiring it. It would have been a symbolic passing of the torch, the gun moving through different hands in subsequent episodes. But Leone died before the project could happen, and with him went one of the last realistic chances for Eastwood to saddle up again in a way that felt fresh. In the years since, Eastwood has occasionally brushed against the genre. Pale Rider in 1985 was a spectral take on the mysterious stranger trope. Cry Macho, released in 2021, placed him back in cowboy boots, albeit in a modern setting. But neither of these aimed to reinvent the wheel the way Unforgiven had. They were, in a sense, quiet epilogues rather than bold new chapters, and maybe that's the point. After a career that spanned nearly every possible variation of the Western hero, from youthful gunman to weary lawman to haunted outlaw, there wasn't much left for him to explore without repeating himself. As Eastwood nears the century mark in age, his choices feel less about genre loyalty and more about the stories that matter to him. He has nothing to prove in westerns. His legacy there is secure. The man with no name, Josie Wales, William Money, these characters will ride on in cinematic memory long after the man himself hangs up his spurs for good. If anything, stepping away from westerns was a way of preserving their power. By resisting the temptation to keep making them, he ensured that each one he did make, especially Unforgiven, would stand as something rare and deliberate. And so the reason Clint Eastwood stopped making westerns isn't that he stopped loving them, it's that he reached the mountaintop, looked out over the horizon, and realized there were other landscapes worth exploring. The western had given him his start, shaped his career, and allowed him to speak in a cinematic language he helped define. But he knew that to keep it alive, he had to leave it behind, at least in its purest form. In doing so, he let it become what it always was meant to be, not just a genre, but a legend.